Hello, it's Jack Cummings with Doorway of Hope in Hamlin, West Virginia. Thank you for joining me for Come Now Let Us Reason 15 Minutes with Pastor Jack. This is Lesson 21, where we'll be covering Revelation 6, 3 through 4, which is 185 AD through 284 AD, the red horse and its rider. When I was in school, there was two subjects that I hated. That was history and science. And as I've gotten older and gotten more into history, I'm not exactly sure that the history that we was taught in school is correct, or if what they emphasize in the teaching is actually the important part. But that's a whole other story. However, I have found that there was a whole lot of people that were like me that did not enjoy history and did not enjoy science, with an emphasis on really, really not enjoying history. I always wondered, why do I care what happened, 2,000 years ago? Why do I care what happened 500 years ago? Why do I care about all that? Well, they always say that history repeats itself. And it's interesting that in our world today, in America today, we are trying to do away with our history. And there's got to be a reason for that. I think we need to know who we are, where we came from, to keep from going down some of the same roads that we've been down before. But the ignorance of the general population concerning history, especially the history of the church, the history of the Roman Empire, has given the futurist view a wonderful place to take root and grow. Because if you don't know the history of the church, if you don't know the history of the Roman Empire, because that's actually what the book of Revelation covers. There's still things in the book of Revelation yet to be fulfilled, but a whole lot of it covers history. Matthew 24, if people knew the history of the destruction of Jerusalem, you couldn't convince them that Matthew 24 was about a future event that has yet to happen. We have to know our history. And so people, us not knowing that history, the Bible tells us, God said that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And the fact that we don't know anything about the history of the nation of Israel, the history of the church, the history of Jerusalem, we're able to be hoodwinked. We're able to be bamboozled into believing all this future stuff that we've been taught, not knowing how it pertains to things that's already happened. Now, as we discussed last time, prophecy is God's revelation of future events. When God prophesies something, it's not a prediction. He's not taking a wild guess at it. He's not figuring. He's not ciphering. God is sharing with us future events. And so when God gives us prophecy, we know that is a sure thing, that is a sure future event. But once prophecy is fulfilled, immediately upon its fulfillment, it becomes history. And so as we look back on history, we can see a whole lot of the prophecies that God gave fulfilled. Now, once you understand the fulfillment of the prophecy and the language of the prophecy, the book of Revelation reads just like a history book. And so knowing that most folks have a hard time with history, when we was in school, what they taught us was dates and names, and this led to this. What day did this happen? What day did this happen? And while we're going to do some of that, I really want to try to move on to the meat and just see exactly what it was that happened, although we are going to cover some dates. Now, one of the problems with the Roman Empire was that they did not have a cut and dry procedure when it came to filling the position of emperor when it became vacant. Most of the time, actually, people moved up through the military ranks. That's how you got to be a leader in Rome, was that you was kind of put in place by the military. Most of the emperors was generals to start out with. They moved up through the military, and so when there was a vacancy, the military appointed them. And that was one of the things when we talked last time about the five good emperors, that was one of the things that helped Rome to be stable and peaceful and secure during the time of the five good emperors. And that was that those five good emperors appointed their successor while they were still living. And so when they passed away, nobody had to figure out who was going to rule the empire next. They already knew. Matter of fact, I believe that most of those guys, when they appointed those emperors to take their place, they actually co-ruled with them for a while. And then when they passed away, this guy's already sort of ready to take over. And so it was a great time for Rome. However, that ended with the last of the good emperors. They no longer had anybody already picked that was going to be the next emperor. So tonight we're going to be looking at the Civil War and the crisis of the 3rd century. When you get to digging into the history of Rome, there was actually a time called the crisis of the 3rd century. And of course that happened during the 200 years. In 192 AD, on New Year's Eve night, Emperor Commodus was assassinated in his bath by a wrestler that had been hired by 3 conspirators to carry out the assassination. Now that was in 192, New Year's Eve in 192. In 193, that became known as the Year of the Five Emperors, and the reason it was called that is because there was 5 emperors that ruled that year. Let's see, the Praetorian Guard killed the first one that came into rule in 193. He was killed by the Praetorian Guard. And then the next one was executed. The next one was beheaded. The next one committed suicide. And the next one, Septimius Severus, served from 193 to 211. And he was the beginning of the Severan dynasty, which lasted until 235. Now, that year of the 5 emperors was a bad year. There was a lot of upheaval. You have a lot of different leaders during one year. You're going to have a lot of upheaval in the empire. But once Septimius Severus started serving, it settled things down, but it was really the prelude to a crisis. That dynasty lasted until 235 AD, and in 235 AD, Alexander, the last of the Servian emperors, was murdered by his own troops during a campaign against Germanic tribes along the Rhine River. So at the time that this happened, at the time of 235 AD, at the time that Alexander was killed by his own troops, the empire was already going through a very rough time. The northern part of the kingdom was being attacked by tribesmen from the north. The Roman Empire had gone so far, and it had grown to the biggest place that it could under the 5 good emperors. That was the height of its power. And then there was natural boundaries. There was all kinds of different reasons why they went that far and then stopped. And they called that land beyond the Roman Empire the frontier. And so the northern frontier, during the time of Alexander, it was being raided. The barbarians raided throughout the northern territory. Forts and civilian settlements had been destroyed. The empire was also being attacked from the east as the Persians were trying to expand their territory into the Roman Empire's territory. So with the pressure on the empire from being attacked on 2 different fronts, the murder of Alexander threw the empire into civil war. So it was already unstable, and then after he died, they didn't know who was going to be emperor next, and so a civil war broke out. And then over the next 35 years, there was at least 25 emperors, all of which there was 2 of them that died a natural death. The rest of them, so you could say at least 23 of the emperors that came in the next 35 years, were murdered or killed in battle. And it became so bad. Now, you can do a study on this, and again, it is actually called, the historians call it the crisis of the 3rd century. Rome was in crisis, and the empire finally splintered into 3 separate states and was not unified again until the rise of Aurelian in 270 AD when he drove Rome's enemies back beyond the frontier. And so the situation got straightened up there for a while, but then after he passed away, it went right back into crisis, and the crisis finally fully ended when Diocletian passed some reforms during his reign, starting in 284 AD. But all this time, the empire was in civil war. It was a bloody, bloody time, and the Roman Empire very nearly did not survive. And even though they did survive, it came out of this crisis totally changed. And most historians call it a watershed moment in the history of Rome. The empire, after it was all over, was divided into two parts, the Eastern and the Western Empire, and they put 4 leaders in charge instead of just one. There was 2 senior leaders and 2 lower ranking leaders. So, what does the Bible say about this time? I told you that if you once you learn the language of the prophets, and you learn the history, that the Bible actually reads, the book of Revelation actually reads like a history book. So when we look at what the Bible has to say about this time period, it says in Revelation 6:3 and 4, and when he had opened the second seal, that's the Lamb, after the Lamb had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, come and see. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. So does that not sound like exactly what took place to the Roman Empire during the crisis of the 3rd century? Because I think it absolutely was. Rome went through civil war. It had many, many different leaders. The trade routes was destroyed. It was attacked by barbarians. A whole lot of things happened that totally disrupted the Roman Empire. It was never the same after the crisis of the 3rd century. So, may the Lord bless thee and keep thee. May the Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. I bless thee in Jesus' name. Thank you again for joining. Next time we will be talking about the black horse and then the pale horse. And these 3 horses play together. They go together, but we're going to be looking at them one at a time. So God bless you until we see you again.